Muy buenos días, estimadas, estimados y estimades
Good
asistentes.
morning, everyone. For joining us today on behalf of the Inter-American Conference on Social Security, it's an honor for us to begin the sessions on the sexual diversity. I welcome everyone to the first panel to dignify aging with dignity for the LGBTQIA+ community. This panel will have the interpretation for both English and Spanish in both Zoom and YouTube. Before we begin with this panel, we want to share with you a proposal that the Inter-American Conference for Social Security will be developing for the permanent panel in sexual diversity in Social Security. We have entitled it to the diversity or safety diversity with the colors of this community. We will provide you with introduction of a short video, and this is provided for all the general public that will be able to be part of these topics. Okay, so we will now share the screen.
Muchas gracias. Este
Thank you very
enlace
much. The link of the blog is being sharing in the chat box, and of course for the live chat in YouTube for you to visualize this video. Now we are currently having 5 articles in Latin America and the Caribbean countries, such as Peru, Ecuador, Argentina, and Mexico, activists and specialists on the linkage between social security and sexual diversity. Now, in this occasion, I would like to thank all the people that are joining us today as lecturers or as a panelist. For me, it's a pleasure for me to introduce and to welcome everyone who is going to talk about the aging with dignity in the framework of sexual diversity. So from today to 10 of July, every Wednesday, we'll be open these spaces and talk about the sexual diversity and social security. Today, we will have the opportunity to talk about the elder or the aging, and for all the people that comprise of this LGBTQIA+ community in the Latin American and Caribbean. And of course, for the challenges of having a dignified elderly community. In this part, we will talk about the social security services and the lack of inclusion in elderly people residencies. Of course, we will analyze the strategies and good practices implemented to promote the right inequality and proposals for this vulnerable population. We will have the activists and experts on this topic who will share the expertise and knowledge on this topic. Hope this forum will be a reflection and dialogue space so we can continue progressing to a more inclusive society and more respectful society in the regions. So we are ready to start with this talk. So I will be introduce our first panelist. Rocio Ruiz Lopez has a specialist in nurturing for the public policies. She has more than 25 expertise within the elderly community. She has nursed since 1988, especially for the elderly people or older people for around 75 years. She also participated in the program for the areas in her location, and she has been director of INAPAM 3 years ago by implementing public policies, and she also has participated in the topics of the elderly. Thank you very much for being part of this panel, and we will pass the floor for you. Thank you very much. Let's continue with the inauguration. Good morning, everyone, and to all people that are joining us today. For me, it's a pleasure to have these welcome words in on behalf of the National Institute for the Elderly People. Today, we gather together just to inaugurate the perspectives in the aging with dignity in the Social Security framework, as well as the Inter-American Conference for Social Security. The INAPAM works for the rights for the elderly, and this is a fundamental compromise as a public policy in which it fights for this kind of population. According to the status, 16.4 population belongs to this elderly community. So 3 out of 4 people will be older in the future. So in this case, we will need public policies to live an elderly life with well-being. So according to, because most of us think that even though they are grandparents or grandmas, we don't think that they have some other options. So we are facing a great challenges to have a great inequality and non-discriminations as the Human Rights Declaration from the UN. I will now state the second and third articles. All human rights born equal and with equal rights. Everyone has the rights and liberties already stated in this agreement without gender, sexuality, religion, culture, political opinion, discrimination, or national origins, or either economical society status. That is why we are now participating in these panels, and we will continue with the start of this event. As being 10:16 of Wednesday, June 12, we are going to be declared in inauguration of this event. Thank you very much.
Haber respondido al llamado de esta conferencia. El INAPAM ha sido una institución pública.
Thank you very much of this introduction. Actually, the INAPAM has already talked about this aging topics. Thank you very much for your intervention, Ms. Rocio, and please stay here in the room. I would like to mention for both the general public or the lecturers, if you have any questions or any comments for the panelists, please let us know through the Zoom chat. Or if you are here on site, of course, we will have some minutes to answer all the questions in the Q&A session. Now, the next panelist is a lecturer in Buenos Aires, and actually she has recorded a video with her intervention. So nowadays, she has been a doctor. She is Eleonora Valdez. She is a joint lecturer for the Research University of Tennessee in the Faculty of Law in the University of Buenos Aires. Dr. Hilda Eleonora has a PhD in the Faculty of Law in Salamanca, Spain. She's adjunct professor of the Faculty of Law in the University of Buenos Aires and also for the project for research on elderly people in violence situations in defense on their rights. So please help us to record her video. Thank you very much.
Regálenos un segundito en lo que compartan la pantalla.
2 more minutes, please.
Buenas tardes, soy Eleonora Ballet, soy
Good
profesora
afternoon, this is Eleonora Ballet, an adjunct professor in the Law University in Buenos Aires University, and I'm also the academic director of the Observatory on the Rights to the Elderly People, also in the Faculty of Law in Buenos Aires. I want to thank you, the Inter-American Social Security Conference, to invited me to this meeting and just to talk about on this important topic and to talk about the dignity on the elderly process and of course being part of the LGBTIQA plus community. So let's start just talking about who are the elderly people? Who will consider the elderly people within the community? Because for most of us, to be or the aging is something that has to be faced by many scopes. And who are the elderly people? For us in American, according to the American Convention for the Human Rights for the Elderly, has stated that all aging people are the ones that have more than 60 years. And this study has been established by the American States Commission in June 2015. And of course, they have the constitutional law in Argentina since November of 2022. So who are the elderly people? The elderly people are those that has or are 65 years or more for the convention. And what does that mean? In Argentina, in 2022, the 8.4% of women are 65 years or 60 years or more. And within the men population, we have a 13% of men in this community. So in this case, women live more. So being an elderly people or elderly person is to be excluded from the society, or being an old person is a in 1968, Arthur Butler, the North American scientist, has mentioned that he studied the ageism, is a state or term, which is the discrimination against elderly people due to their age. So now we have a great number of declarations for the Universal Human Rights Agreement or the American Declarations for the Rights of Human Beings. So that make reference for all the rights for all people, particularly for the American Commissions for the rights of human rights for the 1948 in Bogota, already talk about the aging. And already this station or this agreement mentioned about the aging. Now, the UN still declared the rights for the elderly people. And in this case, I would like to mention a special term, which is dignity. Now, in the dignity, will include the participation of the elderly people, the autonomy as well, and the dignity for them, and the right for their participation within the society. However, the base of the lower part of this pyramid is that they have to be treated with dignity. This is what we want to talk about today. The word dignity is the one we are going to address today. So as I mentioned, the Inter-American Conference Convention for the Rights for the Elderly People, let me just read some statements. So the main objective of the convention is to promote, protect, and ensure the acknowledgement in equality conditions based on the human rights of the elderly people to contribute to their whole inclusion and participation in the society. So according to the convention, we should provide them education and technological education for them. From the Faculty of Law in the Buenos Aires University, we have providing different projects that are called UBASIT, in which we have addressing the justice for the rights for elderly people in vulnerability conditions. Especially, we study the rules on Brasilia that has already updated in 1948. And from this information, we discovered there are three conditions that may affect elderly people, which are together, they provoked extreme vulnerability. These conditions are the age, the gender, and poverty. Mainly, the poverty term affects most of the population in Latin America. So now we have our national constitutions in Article 25 in subsection 3 that talks about the promotion of the states on to take action on the rights and opportunity for the elderly people. However, in Article 75, subsection 22, according to the international agreements, I also mentioned this, and now the Inter-American Convention for the Protection for the Elderly People Rights comprises our number of information in our Constitution. Now, the autonomy, in according to race in our framework work, we were able to detect the lack of this right of autonomy for the elderly people. Autonomy that most of the times should be assisted or treated. And we mentioned that elderly people should apply limitations for the autonomy for both the government or the state and also for the third parties. Now, according to the elderly people, the autonomous constitutions for the University of Buenos Aires in Article 41, they talk about the rights of elderly people as the right of equal opportunities for them in Article 41. So in this case, we started analyzing in our research project, which are the obstacles for the implementation of the rights for the elderly people. So in this framework, we should discover what are the obstacles for them to apply for the law. And most of the obstacles have to do with the lack of information because they don't know that they have the right to access to this right. And the other obstacle is the time that it will take to process the complaints or the time to the rights that elderly people have to access to these processes.
Las mayores son las más afectadas porque se conjuga aquí el factor
We
tiempo.
are resuming, we had some trouble with the connection. Okay, as you may see here, the elderly people don't have this time resource. It's not the same for our 85 person, they have to wait for a judgment versus a 25-year-old person. So what is happening here is that for the judgment, most of the times, the people who are judged are those with the elderly age. Now, many years ago, we continued with the UBA programs, and we made some workshops with many people looking for a legal partnership. So the objective of this study is the elderly people. Many time ago, we started with women, and later on, we started working with the status of men, and then we continue with all the genders. And the CISS started in 2014, and CISS started in 2016, 2018. As I mentioned, a university or the universe of elderly people, we were able to explore and to describe certain service, qualitative and qualitative service, in which we get a lot of good life stories, which provide us with information of violence that prevent people to have their rights. So when we have some surveys, they mention that they have economical violence in most of the studies. However, the majority of the people that were interviewed are people with 65 or 75 years old, and around 95 years old, we had 80% of people. The majority of them are women. However, we have a 55% of women that they are perceive themselves as women, and the 45% of people that they are men. And the half of the interviewers mentioned that they wasn't able, they never contract a lawyer, or they never know that they will have the right to have a lawyer. The 60% only has a lawyer, and the 25% has gone to government to ask for a public lawyer. And the natural violence is the one that are categorized in people that they don't have the right to, or they don't have perception, because the violent situations is perceived outside their environment. And we have seen that the natural violence were presented in more than 75% of the interviewers. Okay, so we made this service, and where these violent situations were located, and more than the 25% of these violence are presented in their households or the interviewers. The economical violence is a pandemic. Since the economical violence affects all people that they don't have any income, or when they have income, they have lower income, of course. And the characteristics of this violence are very similar due to the lack of access to legal channels to face their independence or their freedom. And we have here some statements that appear in the surveys or in the interviews. Some of them mentioned that what were you doing with your house, for example, or for example, you don't have any knowledge about the IT technologies, or for example, mom, why do you want a very big house? So what would you do with these things? So according to the research framework, we have a lot of programs during the pandemic to perform these kind of activities. And based on the previous activities, we were able to observe that there were digital gaps, preferably or mainly for the LGBTQ elderly people. Now, the first digital gap that excluded all the elderly people and most of the people that are not that old is the access to the digital tools. The second digital gap is the one that was produced after the pandemic. It's because we already have chatbots, and any of these kind of persons, they won't have the access to a person access for this information. However, the digital gap was one of our topics that we addressed. And now also we included some information about the people that they consider part of the LGBT community that also are part from the violence situation. And these violent situations are horrible. We had the opportunity to interview a trans woman, and at the age of 18 years old, she left her house. And she spent a lot of time living in the street with 8 years. So let's imagine the risk she just faced. And a trans girl mentioned that actually we are lucky because we are still alive. So in this case, if you make some research, because how are you asking me if most of us are part of the elderly population in this community. So even though they suffer exclusion in their life, of course, they have to face some legal procedures. In this case, 1,118 legal article mentioned that they are able just to have
la identidad o del género biológico, las personas en Argentina por la ley 26.743
people for the Argentina for the article for 1,123 have the right for the identity of gender. This is a perception that we have from one of all the people. So we also have some legal tools, and then we continue with the Social Security. And most of the people or the interviewed people, they don't have the access to Social Security. And when they get to the retirement or pension age, they don't receive any of these benefits. Since when they get to the 65 or the age to have the retirement, of course, they don't have the rights or don't have the possibilities to receive a retirement or a benefit. Now we have the label group for the trans people. And in this case, we identify only 1% of them because these people have the right to access without limitation to Social Security. Even though they don't comply with the requirements to certain roles, they will have the rights to continue or just to conclude their scholar or professional history. Now, during the pandemic, and based on the surveys that we made, most of people had to get together with their partners or with their families. So in this case, the isolation effect began, and most of them have to be with their families in which they are not that understood.
A pesar de ser esto muy difícil, tenemos que agradecer a Graciela
Even
Balestra.
though that we would like to thank to Alejandra Balestra from the Puerta Abierta to la Libertad for the transsexual people and for the LGBTQ of elderly people. And also I would like to thank you to Edgardo Cors, who is part for the retirement people, all the community of LGBTQ. And for also thanks to Federico Armenderos, who is the president of December 26th Foundation. And just remember that we all are getting older. So in this case, all people from the LGBTQ community has suffered a lot in every country. Now, Graciela Balestra, Federico Armenteros, and some other partners that help us out in this service. So now we are in the process on research on this topic, and we will receive the support from other people. Actually, we cannot just make some actions maybe in the long term. However, in this short term, we were able to face and to be aware that this reality is already here. Okay, thank you very much for your time and for the interest in this topic. And we continue in contact. So I will be looking forward for your communication. Thank you very much again.
Es de la Universidad de Buenos Aires y es investigador del Instituto Regional de
Okay,
Estudios
let's just
Sociales y
recurring from this
de la
part.
Facultad Latinoamericana de
And he
Psicología.
has senior researcher at the Regional Institute of Socioeconomical from the University of Buenos Aires. And he also is researcher for the systemic violence experienced by the elderly. Thank you very much, Fernando, for being here with us.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días, buenas tardes, ¿cómo están?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. How are you today?
Por la
Thank you
invitación.
very much for this invitation.
Bueno, la idea es un poco presentar la invitación.
Okay, now the idea is just to introduce with you our research activities on the Social Security and how this impact within the lives for the LGBT communities, and how this also address the vulnerability of the rights and this
Soy sociólogo de formación y comenzamos con investigación.
Restrict the rights for these communities also. I'm a researcher since 2018.
De la sociología, primero,
And the idea of sociology is just to understand what to understand from the elderly or for aging. And of course, to understand the elderly people from the LGBTQ community. However, we should remember the process of aging, of course. Now, from the sociology topics, from many years ago, the society or social programs have been existing from many years ago. However, the significant meaning for the social process has to do with the society. And of course, in the last decades in Argentina, from the reproduction population accounts for 3.5% because nowadays a lower percentage of population has children. So in this case, of course, has many consequences. And this invite us to rethink to apply public policies for these communities. And we always talk about the aging as a stage of the life. And this will be the process as a result of the old age. So within the social point of view, it has to do with the different processes or the different experiences during our life or in our biography, or of course, in both a negative or positive experience that we faced. And of course, let's talk about the elderly or the aging in plural, because this is not an statical term. This depends on the diversity that we are just facing nowadays, either ethnical or culture or residence, difference or the combination of these. And one of them are the gender pertinence. And this is what I'm going to talk about in this meeting. And of course, there is an intersectionality that has to do with the structural vulnerability that, of course, this was provided a different elderly outcome as a consequence of the aging. In general terms, we have different figures that, according to the World Health Organization, mentioned that the elderly people, around 24 people, are old. However, in the case for the LGBT community in Argentina, they don't used to make statements, or they don't ask anything because they prefer to go to any NGOs, organizations, to make claims. And also, the Argentinian service mentioned that 39% of people were mistreated versus the young people in government offices or in the banks. So in this case, we can see here that they are just facing their rights vulnerability. And of course, we know that there are different types of violence. For example, we have the direct or visible violence, which is the most common. And also we have some other indirect or invisible violence in which we can include prejudice or invisibility. And most of the times, it has to do with certain terms that are applied for the all people.
Cuestión quizás más clásica o más conocida, que es la idea de la vejez como inutilidad, los viejos y las viejas no pueden.
And of course, there are some other terms for these old people that most of the times they are not good for them. And of course, we apply invisibilization for this kind of people, or because we are not able just to mark the difference. For example, let's think about the different stages of their life. For example, in the childhood stage, of course, we only have the terms of girls and boys. When we go to the teenage stage, we only have teenage girls or teenage boys. However, when we get to the older age, we just add some other terms, either the elderly people or the old. Of course, most of the times we have good intentions. However, instead of facing the violence, we just cover these terms with other terms. And of course, we just decline or just we don't accept the natural process of the elderly people. Now, in terms of the LGBT community or people, within the framework of Argentina, in the last years in Latin America, we have faced a lot of progress in different movements in this community that we didn't saw in the previous decades, because we are applying different measures that will protect the sexual diversity or to acknowledge the sexual diversity in people, either the penalization or despenalization of the marriage between people of the same sexual orientation, or even some other countries have stated different norms or laws for this kind of marriage. And according to this progress, we know the progress for the structure groups that discuss or they just comment on this progress or this kind of laws. And most of the time, these political changes are recent and they don't have to do with the cultural changes. For example, the 75% of murders of trans people between 2018 and 2017 represents in our continent. Because in our continent, we face economical inequalities. And of course, this is a region in which the LGBT community have some restriction to get to the education or health or employment, among others. In case of Argentina, as my colleague mentioned previously, we have a equal marriage. And this law, established in 2012, this is the first law of freedom or free community. So in this case, the trans person can just change their registration as person, because, for example, they can just go to their mental or psychological treatment without any hormonal procedures. And this law this law mentioned that the person has the right, and this is not an obligation for them. So most of these laws are vulnerable. Even though we have a lot of progress in these different aspects, they keep certain vulnerabilization of these rights. For example, the law mentioned that the person should be treated with dignity, and for most of LGBT or trans people, and most of the trans people don't receive good treatment because most of them are not alike of their images from the IDs, for example, or because or maybe because they were hospitalized in certain rooms with other gender. So the Argentinian anti-discrimination law acknowledged the discrimination due to sexual orientation or identity or gender prescription or description. And of course, we are facing a lot of changes, but they don't cover the cultural changes. So how this impact or how this is reflecting within the LGBTQ community. As we mentioned, these are changes from the last decades, of the last years, and these people has been socialized in different contexts in which their sexual identity orientation were considered as a bad behavior. And of course, because people felt ashamed, and due to our Catholic region, they think that these kind of behaviors were immoral. And of course, we have a lot of different thoughts by the police, for example, that they make some discrimination for certain behaviors. So in this case, we have to include the moral, religion, and of course, the healthcare aspects. Because remember that previously, these behavior were considered as a mental disease. And this kind of situations, of course, generate a restriction to the rights access. And this is translated into the discrimination for the rights of this community. And what happened with this kind of people? So we all have had different experiences through our lives. So as I mentioned, we started working on this research in 2018, so in which we started having the law for the marriage for the different sexual identity. However, this allows us to see the different visions of people and to understand different opinions. And these people socialize in this context. Due to the same reason we are having this meeting. This is why these people were exposed or they were excluded from their families or the society. So the worst things that these people know are from generations, because of course these behaviors or these shared experiences that have to do with this kind of behavior, because they look for an identity, a type of identity. And of course, they are knowing a new world with new laws. And of course, they are being asking again about their sexual orientation. However, there are some other laws that are already progressing in this. As I mentioned, the discrimination also has to do with the age, not only for the age, but also for the sexual orientation. So in this case, people should have a double life. And most of the times they just take them to be more isolated, or if they receive violence, violence, they have to be hidden in their households. Or, for example, we talk about the lesbian people, they were part from other kind of societies because they have to be both mothers, they have to be women in the society, so they have to comply with two roles in the society. Okay, now let's talk about the trans people. Some studies mention that they have a short time of life for these kind of groups for around 45 or 55 years. And of course, this information is very bad because between these two ages, we have a great gap. So in this case, what will happen with the interests of the government? And the experts have mentioned that what can we do for the life expectancy of this kind of population between the 45 and 65 years? And of course, this number is alarming because the life expectancy for women is around 75 years. And it has to do with the previous events in their lives. As my colleague mentioned, for example, most of them have to leave their homes at the elderly age, or because they have to face clandestine experiences, or because they have to leave their school, or because they cannot receive a good healthcare treatment. So their quality of life will be affected in general. So this is the right for their lives for the elderly people or the trans people. So going back to the beginning of this dialogue, as I mentioned, the aging is the social building or construction of the society. Now the states celebrate the life expectancy of the different population. And when we look for the information of the life expectancy of this population, of course, we see different statistics. But however, the government have to spend a lot of money of this. But at the same time, in the region, we can see here that around 35% of people, they are not able to get to the elderly age with well-being. Okay, thank you very much. And this is all for my contribution. Thank you very much for the invitation. Okay, thank you very much, Fernando. I think the sociological focus is very interesting, and even though in the last years it seems that we are continuing progressing in the legal instruments for the different cultures to guarantee the rights of this community, we still don't have the implementation for the necessary spaces of dialogue or for incidents of this community. Thank you very much. I invite you to continue here in the room if you have any question in the auditorium. Okay, now let's continue with our third lecturer, which is Michael Adams, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Advocacy Services for the Elderly. Michael Adams is the Chief Executive for the greatest company called SAGE for the LGBTQIA+ community. He supports the elderly people and also for the stakeholders in the United States through technical assistance and training. And SAGE, it supports all the governments and works with different international and American stakeholders. And he was director for the law at law university or society. Thank you very much, Michael. You're very welcome. Thank you very much. This is Michael Adams. I'm Director General from the CISS. And as I already mentioned, we are dedicated exclusively to improve the quality of life for the LGBTIQ8+ elderly communication because we have more than 4 million people in this community in the United States. And for 2040, this number will increase in 7 million. And this group of elderly people represents one of the more emerged people in the country. Now, my speech of today's meeting will be centered on the strategies that our alliances are been working on behalf on the elderly people in the LGBTIQ8+ community for the improving their quality of life and of course just to support them in the community. However, I think it's important to just take some minutes to describe what are the main importance of these challenges faced by the LGBT elderly people. And these challenges begin or started by the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has been increased due to the different democracies of the country. In the last decade, the LGBTIQ plus communities has faced different legal and acceptance or society process in the United States. If, for instance, the primary protection of the United States acknowledged in 2015 that the marriage of people of the same gender, this is a constitutional right. And a recent survey mentioned that 7% of the residents in the United States, they support now the marriage of people of similar gender. So the pioneers of the LGBT community are part of this great process of progress. So since 1950, they lead their efforts to promote the LGBT community in the United States. Now, and after some decades, in the Stonewall leverage, they mentioned in the United States in 1969, they leader a legal and political and social fight against the anti-system for the LGBTI community and just to have the rights for this kind of community. Now, in the United States, we want to thank to the elderly people for this notable progress because they are great heroes for the LGBTI communities in our country. However, most of these people in the United States, they don't live the hero's life because most of them in my country, they have to face a severe social isolation. They don't get social support. And this is due to the discrimination and the different social structures in familiar structures. The LGBTI elderly people have double probability in the United States in general. They have to get older alone, so they have more times or lower times to be parents. It means that they lack adult children that can provide them with care or support in the last age, the years of age. Now, in terms of discrimination, it's probably that the LGBTI elder people have not connection with their families, and most of them in the United States also has greater risk of poverty while they get older. This is especially for the elder lesbians, for the LGBTI4 cohort, and the transgender people. or the non-binary people. Now, the LGBTI elderly people face disparities in healthcare, which are great challenges because they have to face great number of HIV or infections, and of course, we can include mental illnesses of the abuse for certain substances due to the intolerance and discrimination within the society. Now, the strategies in my country to address the needs for the LGBTI elderly people should take into consideration the systemical racist or racism, because the great majority of people of color has greater possibility to face discrimination. Either they are poverty or because they got lower quality healthcare treatment, or because they cannot have the essential rights for a decent quality of life in their last years. Now, it's important to mention that the transgender old people face acute challenges in the United States. For example, to have higher numbers of poverty and discrimination, and to have greater obstacles to get to adequate and respectful healthcare treatment. And that is why the elderly people, they have to face some other challenges while they get older due to the lack of dependency and the need to depend on others to receive health care or medical care. And of course, this is translated to the lack of autonomy and respectful. Now, we still have a lot to do to guarantee that the transgender people that are in the household or residency for the elderly people, of course, they have to receive dignity and respect for both the assistant people. The higher rates of isolations, poverty, and the challenges of medical care for the LGBTI elderly people in the United States in general terms, and specifically for the older people of color, older people, and of course for the transgender people. This means that they have a greater need of the professional health care. However, the support are not being provided due to the negligence of the government. So now the new legal processes are supporting to diminish this discrimination. There is still a higher tendency in the United States to provide organizations or religious groups an legal exception on these laws due to this kind of progress. And of course, these things will get worse or got worse due to the Donald Trump presidency, when his government made as much as they could for the protection of LGBT people in the United States. Now, if Trump can gain the presidency in the future, of course, we have to face a lot of problematics for this process, mainly for the communities that they don't support him. And the democratic practices will be elected. Now, let's talk about what we are doing in terms of the positive difference for the LGBTIQA plus community in the United States. As we mentioned, this has already funded for 46 years ago to address this kind of problematics and to work for a greater quality of life and to receive healthcare and medical treatment and to take care of all the older people in this community in my country. We choose a diversity of strategies of promotion to have a positive and systemic change for the older people in this community. And before continuing with this, I would like to mention on the ways we are working to create services in special programs designed specifically for the LGBT older people in their communities. We know that these communities offers a diversity of services based on the community in different kind of cities in the United States. Now, the extension of the programs or services available cover according to their locations, such as New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, which offers the greater opportunities for them. Now, in contrast, there are not favorable services for the LGBTI population available. Only the 9% of the older people in this community live in rural areas, for example, in which the services for them are available, and in them we include the community networks that are administrated for the LGBTI communities in the New York, and also by combining different social services in support for different companies or organizations in the United States, or friendly visits, or in which many people can just visit the older people in their houses. Or also we have some policies for the personal financial assistance or equitable assistance for people with lower income in a high number of cities in the country. While these efforts are very critical, they are not enough to attend the needs or to address the needs of around 4 and 7 million of older people in this community in the United States. And this population is hired to satisfy their needs and desires through the creation of a separate service to provide their good income and household. Now, this network of healthcare or services for the old people in the country, for both private and public, with the objective to provide them with a respectful support, of course, in the required scale to the less favorable people in this community. We are working to get it in two ways. First of all, to be supported by laws and public processes that guarantee that all LGBTI older people will have similar access to the medical treatment. And in second place, to provide training assistance in different credentials to the vast network to care service for the older people offered by the private sector. For not-profit. Now, let's talk about the SAGE work. In the United States, this work is subsidized by the federal, municipality, and the state. Now, the most important is the federal, because the federal government plays an important role for all the services in my country. For example, after these efforts for a decade, in 2020, we will able to solve the problem for the elderly people in providing support on the local services for the elderly people, to have a better focus on the older people in this community for the dissemination of the services. In addition, while the Obama administration, we convinced the federal government to include specifically the LGBTI older people in a national survey and global survey in the beneficiaries on the service of the elderly people. And also from 2010, SAGE has been associated for the federal government to administrate a national organization for the resources for the LGBTI people in our country that support all people under the financial government or local government, we reach all them in this community with competent services. Now, according to the federal process after November, it's important to mention that in the United States, we can also have different progress in terms on the state public policies. Actually, we have greater success in the last years in terms of different public policies around the country. And now I can just share with you some other information about the public legislation applied in my country. However, we can just mention them after my intervention. While the public policy is important for us to continue working to change the practices in the policies in the private sector, because most of the 80% of the nursing qualified centers are administrated in a private way. And the religious organizations accounts for the more than 80%, particularly for the population, a popular community. And due to the ignorance, most of the older people in LGBTI community, while they are expending almost all their life by acknowledge themselves, they have to go back to the closet. So once they have to get to the healthcare environment, they are mistreated. So now CISS has been provided training for the healthcare providers to provide this information for them and the necessary tools to provide a adequate and respectful health care to the LGBTI older people. And of course, we still have to take time just to talk about this training for this kind of people. Now, before concluding my intervention, I would like to highlight, as the SAGE work has been focused in the United States in the last years, we will have a greater progress to support stakeholders in the global community that work on behalf of the LGBTI older people in their countries with an Latin America focus. Nowadays, we are working on an initiative for the aging to the LGBTI people with Costa Rica, Filipinas, and Nepal. And we are supporting research activities for the research of LGBTIQA plus community in Mexico and some other countries. I hope that you have been able to learn about the success we have here for the community. And of course, we have a great progress. We still have a lot to do in my country. An important way to continue progressing is just to learn together and to have a frontier collaboration within the countries. And we are very happy on participating here today. And we welcome the opportunity of collaborations to continue learning from each other. And of course, working together within that we all can curate a world in which all the LGBTI older people can just get older with great opportunity and with respect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael. I think that these incidents of these public policy instruments are very important as well, that can also be replicated in Latin America. Thank you very much for your intervention. Please be in here in case we have some other answers, some other questions or comments. Okay, let's introduce the last lecturers of today's meeting, who is Mr. Cuauhtemoc Vega, a specialist in a psychologist for the elderly population, and he holds a master's degree in UNAM, National University in Mexico, with psychotherapy based on the elderly population and the aging. And also he has been coordinator of the diploma course of the Challenge for the Sexuality in 2021. And also he has been working in the gerontical area for this community. Thank you very much. Welcome to this meeting. Okay, thank you very much. Actually, I just prepared a presentation, so let me just share it with you.
Bueno, yo voy a, bueno, en principio agradezco la participación.
Okay, first of all, I will thank the participation and the invitation of my colleagues, because your contributions allow me just to establish a punctual state-of-the-art of the access to social rights of the elderly people that belong to a certain population associated to this LGBTQIA+ community. Okay, now I will only talk about the LGBT community plus, because this can allow us to establish a discussion or a similar discussion in regards to the social fights that these groups have faced during different years. However, currently we have been facing that this has been a fight for the last 7 decades. Now we will talk about the comprehensive attention in terms of social rights in gerontological treatment. Now I will introduce with you what is a gerontological attention based on the 3 important scopes. Based on that services or medical care or even rights to which all the LGBT plus community should have. Now, the comprehensive gerontological attention have to do with all the medical and biological sciences that can be translated into those professional activities or sciences in scientific disciplines or independent disciplines. And most of them are based on the gerontologic. And just to mention some of them, we can include medicine, geriatrics, or odontology. Now, in the other, another framework, we will have all the psychological sciences that focus on the psychogerontology. And in this scope, we will include all the subdisciplines or scientific disciplines associated to the development process that in the last 40 years or more has not been included the development to get older or the aging. And finally, within the social sciences and the humanities sciences, we can just include the social gerontology. In particular, this is based on the medical treatment or attention for the aging or older people, because some research or the academical programs are already implemented in different kind of programs, such as the community or the social programs. So now within the humanities sciences, we can just find some legal instances or the anthropology, sociology, or the social work. So the group or all these knowledge fields should be translated into different strategies for training programs or public policies that will allow to guarantee the access to social rights in general for the elderly people, but mainly for the LGBTA plus communities. So the linkage with these knowledge fields is that each of them can be translated into the access of a right if we have adequate public policies. So the implementation of these fields will provide us with this comprehensive gerontology attention. So now this gerontological attention is linked to the access to the rights or social rights. So I would like to mention the classification that has to do with some other aspects. However, we can include those economical, social, cultural, or environmental rights, which are identified as those related to the basic needs for people well-being. And of course, this is the exercise of the social rights in the society, and this will provide it with a grade of social development in a social state. If a state guarantees the public service access to a good quality in the social area, there not be social security. So now, in terms of social security, nowadays, for example, for the great majority of people, this is linked to a series of things or requirements to which people should apply for different institutions' benefits. For example, the right to education is linked to the economical possibilities of the context or in the development of the location or the environment or the access to different satisfaction requirements that, and without them, the people won't have access to the social security. And the access to a retirement and the difference between the different countries, for example, in Argentina, in Mexico, we have a contributory and non-contributory pension. This will depend on the either public or private company. Now, here in Mexico, these are not as public policies. However, recently, we have the non-contributory pension is the right or universal right for the person. This not existed previously. So the absence for public policy in general terms for the elderly in Mexico has been progressing from different years. Actually, nowadays, the social programs, such as the non-contributory pension, is not a right. However, this is part of a social program of a government or for the social program from the state. So now we're still been working on this in Mexico by the Senate chamber. Now, if we think about the comprehensive gerontology attention and if they are already stated in the American Convention on the Human Rights for the Elderly, we might think that as a public policy for the society based on the ontological treatment, we should be asking ourselves about on the participation or integration for the community. So, in this case, what will be the capacity for the elderly that are part of the LGBTA plus on their participation or to be integrated in the community? The rights for the elderly that receive long-term services of care services. Now, in the current public policy, we have a national right system associated to the long-term health care. Now, what would be the possibilities for the elderly that belong to any of the LGBTA plus community if they have access to these long-term services? And of course, we should include the right to Social Security. And as Mr. Michael mentioned previously, and also Hilda, and also Fernando, so those characteristics associated to the life of the elderly that are now 65 or more years and belong to this community, what real access they were able to have during their life process to be able to have this Social Security, either if they have contributory contributional system, or they have the right for a household, or they have been discriminated, or if any of them have not access to the education, or because they have to leave their homes, or most of them, they are dedicated to the sexual work, or a greater proportion of the LGBT people during their lives have to face different informal jobs. So in these examples, they don't have access in Social Security. So let's think about the public policy to the right of employment. So we have in different public policies, we have this norm already applied. So if they comply with different years of employment, they will be granted with Social Security, of course. So as institutional public policy, this will be very important for the inclusion of the elderly people to continue with an employment life outside or after their retirement. And of course, we have to include the right to health. And according to the characteristics of the LGBT community, let's think about the needs of trans people or the needs of people that during their life or after the 60 years or more, they will receive a different HIV diagnosis or some other sexual transmission diseases. Now, about the right of education and how people in this community during their life, or maybe nowadays in this age of 65 years, if they have access to an accessible education, or if they receive a great education or cultural education. So in this case, we can just be describing each of them. And of course, we can include the right for culture, the right for commuting, the right of household, or the right of mobility, of accessibility. So we should ask ourselves how all these people are represented within the public policies, particularly here in Mexico. However, of course, as my colleagues have mentioned, this situation is not only faced in Mexico, but in other countries as well. So now, how these all rights are linked to the gerontological attention. So now about the psychogerontology that has to do with the mental health of people, and that has to do with the care or certain behaviors based on the medical care. So in this case, people should have the right of mental care or the establishment of different kind of behaviors that can take them to a better lifestyle. Or what are those elements necessary for them to manage their lives or just to have a plan for the life? For example, the social gerontology associated to these rights, or for example, this work made by Michaels in respect to the different communities or the organization for the communities to receive or just to ask for these rights and to manage these rights. Or the biogerontology that is associated to the elderly rights to receive long-term care. And also, it is important to mention that when we talk about medical care, we don't only consider the physical care, but also the mental care or the physical care or the environmental care. So in this case, we should include all the aspects for the comprehensive gerontology attention. So if we had the opportunity to apply the gerontology right as a tool to transform or to make it viable to comply with the exercise of these rights, this might be a very interesting exercise for the communities and for the government. And of course, just to comply with the different public policies for the LGBT plus communities. And why we should think or consider the gerontology rights for those rights already established in the American Convention and associated for the LGBTA plus community. In the Inter-American Convention is based on different principles that I will only mention three. And these three process has to do with the topic we are talking today. The first one has to do with equality and non-discrimination. The second about dignity, independency, and autonomy. And the third about participation, inclusion, and effective society. Now, people that are 65 years old today, what should they do to get the acknowledgement for their identity or for their orientation or their preferences? So we might think that during the lives of these people, of course, they keep fighting for non-discrimination and for equality, and for to acknowledge their independency or to acknowledge their autonomy. And they can just progress on this due to the participation for their effective inclusion in the society. My colleagues have already mentioned this in the previous participations. For example, Mr. Michael mentioned this previously. However, in 1970, each year we have the diversity, the World Day of Sexual Diversity in June 25. This will allow us to continue working in the acknowledgement and respect for the sexual diversity. Now, for example, in Mexico, 46 years ago, 46 ago, we have a event to acknowledge all the population that are part of these groups. So in Mexico, we have 46 years being manifested each year for a right access to these communities, and we have been fighting for almost 5 decades with a constant claim, and of course, by the people that are part of these groups. However, without the access of these rights, we have to face different changes in terms of the culture or international matters. And this change will allow these communities of these groups that belong to the LGBTQIA+ community, they will have these possibilities or the possibility to access to these rights. And now, in terms of international requirements, help us to think that the gerontological attention based on the public policy already acknowledging the needs of this population is feasible. We already have talked about the exclusion or marginalization of people.
También han soportado, pero no fue hasta el 2008 que la Organización Mundial de la Salud establece que la transexualidad no es una enfermedad mental. Pensemos cómo
what's happening now in the theoretical ways of the normative frameworks or for the attention guidelines in terms of mental disease. So they have talked about the transsexuality and how these old people were treated many years ago. So when the WHO mentioned that transsexual people are not those that have mental diseases, of course, we will need attention for these groups based on acknowledgement or recognition of their rights. And this is very important. Now, the CIE 11 on 2011 eliminate the transsexuality as a mental disease in their frameworks. And in this case, they state or define this as a transsexual system for the acknowledgement of this different identity. And of course, this add in this transsexual category to guarantee their medical right access. So 46 years ago in Mexico City, we started with a manifestation which is already higher. We still keep fighting for their rights. So for those people after 46 years that are older than 60 years old, of course, they are the survivals of the fights. They are the survivals that begin with this fight. And for all people of 65 years or more, it's important for them to participate in these meetings, to continue working or continue being educating, and to have greater opportunities for the groups that belong to the LGBTQIA+ community. And just as a conclusion, by starting making some models that will consider the needs, the real needs of the elder people of the LGBTQ+ community, it will be we will have the possibility to comply with different equality and non-discrimination principles by including dignity, independency, autonomy, participation, inclusion, and effectiveness in the society. So the proposal for the gerontological process, of course, this might be very useful. We only have to take the items useful for this community. So nowadays, we have the opportunity to talk about in the meetings that the LGBTQIA+ community should have access to all the social human rights to contribute to the communities in different aspects. Thank you very much for being part of this. Thank you very much again. Thank you very much, Cuauhtémoc, for your presentation and for this analysis within the social rights and this comprehensive attention for the elderly people in the community. Thank you very much. We have some comments in the chat box already here. Okay, I think that Laura Ortiz want to mention something. Okay. Okay, I don't know if you have any other questions in this respect. Okay, just to take a photo for all the lecturers or the ones that join us today, please turn on your cameras. Thank you very much, everyone, for the participation. And while our communication staff take the photo, I would like to invite you to the next meeting on the next Wednesday. And actually, in all the proposals, we will have a trans subject for the social accessibility for this kind of communities. We have Carlo Guardia Pastrana and Carlo, we have from France, Bolivia, Mexico, and Chile, respectively. So on behalf of the General Secretary, Belarca Hernandez, and on behalf of the Inter-American Conference for Social Security, I would like to thank all the lecturers or the panelists for your disposition to work with this conference. And we hope that this space can continue just to fight for the rights to the LGBTQIA+ community. Thank you very much for all the staffs and for the IT community as well. Thank you very much. Let's see. Thank you very much. Let's see on the next Wednesday. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Ahora sí, a todos. Gracias.